Welcome to Season 1's final episode of Unlocked, an NAMFS podcast, Episode 12. Operational Resilience in a Changing Market.
Welcome to Season 1's final episode of Unlocked, the NAMFS podcast where we explore the evolving challenges, opportunities shaping the asset management and field service industry. Today, we're looking at how companies are building stronger, more adaptable operations in the face of changing markets and increasing regulatory pressure. We'll discuss how firms are balancing efficiency with compliance, what operational adjustments are helping control costs, and what true resilience looks like for field service providers in 2025 and beyond, especially for those smaller organizations. We'll also reflect on the lessons learned in recent years and how they can help prepare us for the future market shifts and policy changes. With that, I'm going to go ahead and ask our panelists to introduce ourselves. My name is Eric Miller. I'm the Executive Director of NAMFS, and we have, as one of our panelists identified, the ABCs of the industry here. So let's go ahead and start with Adam.
My name is Adam Miles, CEO of MPI Miles Preservation. I'm also a board member of NAMFS.
Thanks. Brandon?
Brandon Kirkham, Chief Operating Officer of JGM Property Group. I've been able to balance my, career in the industry, half on the mortgagee side, half on the servicer vendor side. I too am also a member of NAMFS.
And Chad.
Excellent. Chad Rouleau. I am the CEO of First Rate Field Services, and I am also the current president of NAMFS.
Well, thank you. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. Let's get right into it. How are companies balancing efficiency with compliance as regulatory scrutiny continues to increase?
Well, so we've seen regulatory influence over our industry really spike, and then it troughs, and then it spikes again. And so during the 2010 meltdown, we saw a lot of scrutiny from Frank Dodd, from CFPB, FHFA, create lots of regulations for us to not only follow, but really have guided our whole companies around. We had to center our companies around it. COVID came along 10 years later, and there were even more scrutiny put in place because of lending practices, moratoriums on foreclosures, job losses, etc. Actually, the last 5 years, we've seen a little bit of a decrease in regulatory scrutiny over the mortgage industry as a whole. Doesn't mean that there's less now than there was 15 years ago. Certainly, there's still more. There's still more that we have to deal with. Right now, it feels like there's a little bit of a pressure relief valve. However, I think scrutiny is coming from servicers. Certainly, scrutiny is coming from GSEs. Scrutiny is coming from different markets. Certainly in REO, where at the end of the day, the check is being written by those who have a stake in it. And so the scrutiny and the regulatory scrutiny is coming from dollars and cents, which I think makes more sense in our industry, right? So the way that we adapt to that is we first learn expectations of our clients. We learn and I'm speaking as an industry here. We learn expectations of the federally insured loans, and then we meet those. The challenge, I think, has been how to communicate that to guys that are actually doing the work, and some of the smaller shops having to deal with that scrutiny. So one of the ways that we have seen people in the field or in the industry do it is we are not. I believe that we are not as good timely as we used to be. And what I mean by that is there are a lot more rural properties that we deal with today than we did even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That is putting great strain on efficiency and staying in compliance with due dates and timeliness. So what we're seeing people have to do is, you know, take less focus on timeliness and making sure that the properties are done properly and the properties are done at the same time. In other words, if you have 4 properties up in Alaska, you're going to go do those 4 properties, even if 3 of them, are on time and 1 of them is late. So you have to balance the efficiency of getting the work done with the expectation of the client and the expectation of the expectation of being in compliance with timeliness. So that was the biggest thing that I saw, or I'm seeing now, is the rules around timeliness and having to, or being able to do that efficiently, because you just can't do one-offs. You can't drive to Anchorage for 1 order and then drive back 2 weeks later just so that everything's on time. So
Sure.
anyway, that's my thought on that.
Okay. Brandon?
Yeah, Adam, thank you for that. Adam kind of took a top-down approach, and I'm going to take kind of a bottom-up approach, because I do agree with Adam that I feel like systemically regulation has lessened over the last several years than the pace that we saw COVID as well as pre-COVID, all the way back to when vacant property registrations became kind of the firestorm in our industry. What I see today is more very targeted pockets of regulatory changes that have an adverse impact on the industry. Case in point, there's a municipality in California that creates some specific registration rules for the property inspection vendor network in order to be compliant in that county. That's a great example of kind of that bottom-up approach that we see a little bit more targeted and effective implementation of. And at the end of the day, many times it's our vendors in the field that may be the first one to see the regulatory change. And I think it's important through the partnership with NAMFS is for there to be communication and sharing of that information, but go one step beyond of simply saying, Houston, we have a problem. It's more about this is a proposed solution to accommodate this new potentially industry problem. What JGM has done, as well as other industry partners, is finding ways to create some sponsorships to help that local vendor become compliant from a regulatory perspective. We do have limitations because these aren't our employees, they're independent subcontractors, so there's things I can and cannot do. But I think it's the awareness, it's the documentation, and it's taking it one step further and proposing potential solutions in order to be in compliance with that regulatory event. So I think that's, from my perspective, I think our eyes and ears in the field are our most critical business partners, and they have a big influence on that compliance piece.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Chad?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to kind of expand on that because Adam and Brandon both covered it very well in terms of, the changes and what have you. And being the third spoke on the wheel for this question, they definitely went in depth there. So, what I see and what we do is, and it's so critical, is being out in the field, right? And so that's kind of to Brandon's point, certainly to Adam's point, but being out in the field and working with our boots on the ground, they're going to have the most direct information, and they need to have the best direct training, right? And so whether you're a boots on the ground person or you're a regional or a national that's working with boots on the ground folks, it's really, really important that you bring yourself as close to the client requirement as possible. So whether that's engaging with your clients if they're direct, or engaging with your regional or your national, and saying, okay, let's get to a property, not just a phone call, not just a video call, but let's get to a property. Let's talk about these changes in compliance and kind of what we're looking for. And, a lot of times, to Adam's point, what we see is there's certainly some of that slippage in the timeline, but it's an acceptable slippage in the timeline as long as it's in compliance, because the risk is so much greater, to say, okay, well, if I go an extra day beyond the timeline, but I'm in compliance, that's much more valuable than saying, okay, let's get it done within that 24-hour window or 48-hour window, but then I'm out of compliance, and then the risk associated to being out of compliance on whatever that particular task is. So the best thing that I can say to our membership is, being in the field, being at the asset, and getting that information in real time in a deployable way that's tangible, right? That you can touch, and you don't get, and then the best way to get that is by being at the property and actually seeing it in real time, either with your client or, designate.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. And again, that was a lot of information, obviously, to delve into. I think one of the things that Brandon brought up was, bringing that information up from the bottom, right, from the field to your particular client, and then also, again, as he indicated, sharing it with NAMFS, and then that's something that NAMFS would love to take to our Industry Solutions Committee and have conversations about, so that we can have, dialogue with the next industry or the next entity that ends up coming up with a potential what they see as a new solution, right? Let's try and standardize those things. Those are real big opportunities for us. So thanks for sharing your guys' thoughts on that. Second question, Brandon, we'll start out with you. What operational adjustments have you made to manage cost pressures while maintaining service quality?
Eric, thank you for the opportunity. There's no secret sauce here. It's really the same thing that we've been faced with for the last, 4 or 5 years. And really, to me, the best business practices and what we've been doing is first and foremost is client communication, is to be able to share honestly and transparently where you're having difficulties and what your ask is and what your need is. Second thing and Adam kind of mentioned it, is repackaging your submarkets that are margin adverse, or developing alternative schedules in order to provide a level of service that is economically efficient. It may not be as compliant as it has historically, but what we're finding is many clients are open to making those minor adjustments based on a well-documented set of reasons, facts. So for example, we do all of Hawaii. There is an island that we have to fly an inspector over. We do that once a month. By us sharing that with our vendor, with our clients, and our clients packaging all their inventory together for that one event, it makes it more effective for it. So I just think it's just that grinding out that technique to be through with it. What I do think is a little bit newer for maybe the industry is exiting markets or submarkets that are have margin adverse elements to it. In the past, there's win one, take the good with the bad, win one, lose one. In certain areas, there's not enough wins to accommodate the loss. And so you have to have those honest conversations with the client, and it may require you to exit a market in order to make you stronger overall.
Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there were some great points there, Brandon. And yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to transparency, right? And having, strong relationships with your clients and being able to say, this is where we can go, this is what we can do. I think there's a lot to be said there. I don't think the industry was always that way, right? I think there was a lot of, you had to be very strategic because a one no could cost you an entire relationship. And I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that's changed. And I think that kind of strengthens that. The other thing I'll say though is diversification, out to our members or thinking about being members. You can even see it with NAMFS. We've started to diversify just in, name changing and convention. It's not just a name change, it's expansion of membership. And I think that's so critical to any business and looking to diversify, because not every single business line is going to be booming every single moment of every single day. And so I think through that diversification, you can really set your business up in such a way that whenever you are in a slower environment with one business line, another business line can kind of help kind of pick up and so forth and so on. So, and I'm not just saying being two business lines, I'm saying being 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, 15, right? Like, and you got to do it responsibly, and growth, you got to grow responsibly, but diversification is absolutely key. So that way you can ensure that you're still bringing a quality product or a quality service to market, whatever that business line may be, whether you're solely in mortgage field services or you're solely in SFR, or maybe you're in both or what have you, but you're still able to bring a quality service or product to market for your clients, and make those decisions very responsibly. So I always say diversify, diversify, diversify. It's very, very important.
Thanks, Chad.
Okay.
Adam?
Yeah, by the way, the B and the C's of this topic are already good. So I'm going to add my A's to the A, B's, and C's. So I like what Brandon said there. We need to not be afraid, I think, of being the right vendor to our clients. In other words, sometimes we can't do everything, and it's helpful when we acknowledge that, and sometimes you have to part separate ways, and frankly, sometimes there's a need, and that opens up a time for negotiation, and a client may retain you because there just simply may not be another choice. So, Brandon, that's a great point. The second thing I would say is NAMFS is a valuable resource for finding those in those areas that are super hard to cover. Just as a quick anecdotal example, I visit my children in Salt Lake City, and I drive to California from Salt Lake City because in California you're not allowed to buy gas powered tools anymore, and just a whole bunch of other rules. But there are a couple of properties that I check up on for our companies for a few different clients that are up in the mountains so far that it literally 6 hours away from any major city. And you wouldn't think that, okay, in California that's the case, but it just simply is. So when we do that and we look to NAMFS and recognize, gosh, there's a guy up in, I don't know, Truckee, California, that he lives up there, and he does a couple of different things, but he happens to be a member of NAMFS or work for a NAMFS member. And, he may only do 2 properties a year for you, but at least there's a guy there that can do 2 properties a year for you while not having to send other resources, that far away. So we've utilized that a lot, especially, as we're seeing gas prices come down dramatically. Diesel in California is still, $4 or $5 a gallon. So the more that you can help the field actually get work done efficiently, I think the better off we all are, right? And then the third thing is, if we can continue to push pricing, be active members of NAMFS in when there's surveys sent out, when there's things that are questions that are asked, there's things that are asked of membership at large, that we respond quickly to that, so that decisions can be made either by the board, Eric, etc., in trying to get pricing appropriately stacked against the efforts that are actually being made out in the field. So anyway, just my 3 things.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think diversification is something that we've talked about at NAS for a while. We've brought a couple different opportunities, but I mean, case in point, right? I mean, just look at any large company. I mean, Coca-Cola, let's just go beverage, right? Soda beverages, right? When soda started to sales start to impact, all of a sudden, then they jumped into the water side, right? And now water, we don't want to do the bottles. Well, oh, now let's get into these probiotic drinks, right? I mean, it's an evolution, right? And again, if you don't have those, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, members, non-members, this industry. It's just re-looking at the situation and not and realizing you can't just take this and drop it in. You have to mindfully prepare to take in those alternative opportunities. And I think, like I said, a lot of the most successful companies that are out there are doing that. So I think that's a great lesson for everybody. So we'll wrap up on this particular question. What lessons, Chad, from recent years can help the industry better prepare for future market shifts or policy changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a great question. And thank you for it. The one thing that I would say, a couple things, but the first thing I would say is um the past few years, with just the shifting of the market through, pre-COVID into COVID, and then kind of back out again. I don't think we're totally out of it, just from a volume perspective. I don't think it's there yet, right? I don't think we've normalized to where it probably should be. But I would say is really learning how to be resilient. And so looking at your business, I know for us looking at our business and saying, okay, what makes us resilient? And I go back to the diversification thing, right? Being diversified and not counting on any particular part of the economy, because I think the economy at large, it fluxes, and all of the micro parts to the economy, they're constantly in flux. One market might be doing very well, or one sector of the economy might be doing very well, one might not be. And so really being able to kind of dial in to that and find that resiliency through that diversification. The other thing that I would say is understanding, just like we talked about, level setting expectations with the clients and being transparent and having those conversations, and Adam, I think, put it very very well. Being a good vendor, right, for the client, being the right vendor for the client, which means having those conversations. Just like that, I would say being transparent with ourselves and level setting the expectations with ourselves, right? And so we talk about pricing, or we talk about technology, or we talk about these other things that are issues potentially, right, for some, or maybe not for others, but are pretty well known issues. Pricing, we know, is a well known issue, but really looking at that and saying, okay, well, we know realistically where pricing could probably go or not go, right, based on a plethora of things: economy, political environment, etc. And just level setting with ourselves and saying, okay, let's solve within the problem, right, instead of just saying, here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem. Let's solve within the problem. And I think in solving within these different problems, and other business owners and folks that are running businesses in NAMFS, and even outside of NAMFS, I think once you start to solve within the problem and say, okay, this is a very real environment. Now, how are we going to solve that? Right? We're going to have to say this isn't changing, or it's not going to change enough to move the needle. And so what can I do? Right? And so being very real, being very transparent with ourselves, and looking at it that way, I think, and being optimistic, and being critical, of the landscape, and being real about the landscape. And that's what we've been doing at NAMS too, is saying, okay, let's have real conversations with our members. We know this is an issue. Let's talk about realistic solutions, right? Not saying we're going to solve the entire problem, or we're going to solve the world's problems today. That's not realistic. Let's be realistic, and in that realism, I think that's where we find value. And I think as businesses, that's where we find value, and we're able to do things such as diversify and do all those other things. And I think all of that is what makes us resilient. I would say that was probably the biggest lesson that I've learned through the past few years, is just what makes us resilient, and leveraging those things into opportunities.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, just real quickly, I have just a little something to add to internally as we look at policy changes coming up. I mean, everybody on this call is fairly well seasoned. We know that things change, whether it's the economy, whether it's volume, whether it's criteria, whether it is policy changes from government. What we do at MPI is make sure that we have our SOPs, our standard operating procedures, in a way that can be flexible, yet that is what we live and die by. So as policies change and we need to modify those, great. But having a standard that everybody in the organization lives by, works by. If you go to any one of our houses, no matter the client, it should have a certain standard to it. Anything in the office, whether it's submitting a bid or submitting an invoice, there's the expectation that we're being transparent with costs, that we're being transparent with billing, we're being transparent with estimates, and then being very consistent about the way that we treat our people that either work for us in the office, in the field, or frankly, how we treat our clients. And so I think if there's consistency in those areas, when the storms come, whether it's volume, whether it's COVID, whether it's policy changes, I think you're ready there to absorb it and bob and weave with the changes that are coming our way.
Okay. All right. Brandon?
Yeah, I know we're getting to the end of the podcast, and I know we're going to release this right as the new year begins, and you'll hear it here first. 2026 will probably be one of the more radical years of change. I'm not saying instability, I'm saying change. Having lived through two real estate corrections in the past in my career, I'm not forecasting a third, but what I am forecasting that there would be a tremendous amount of change and some inflection points. As Adam mentioned, you could potentially have the privatization of both Fannie and Freddie, and they would be operating in a new world. You have affordability factors that have always been persistent from a income to cost perspective, but you also have new affordability factors from hazard insurance and property taxes, creating new dynamics that the default industry has never experienced before. You have a series of regulatory changes that potentially could be in the works that could shift the model from where it is today. And so I just think that collectively there's a lot of ingredients out there to indicate a rapid amount of change in 2026. It goes back to items that Chad and Adam shared, which is, diversification and resiliency. You may see a return to some degree of the traditional REO model. And that creates a whole different kind of set of work rules and work processes that support that perspective. So all in all, I just think 2026 is going to be a year to hang on. It's going to be a year that if you want to lean into the change and offer your services to find ways that you can meet the new emergent challenges, whether it's type of service, whether it's location of service, I think all those things are going to be called upon. We often focus on the negatives or the challenges we have, but as an industry and with the support of NAMFS, we have a lot of things to be thankful for. I think you have a very driven board led by Chad. You've got very specific elements that we want to address as an industry. And I just think that the time is really resident for more people to join NAMFS and be part of the solution.
Well, thank you. Hey, Brandon, that's great, great dialogue there. Great answer. I think, again, from NAMP's perspective, we do really enjoy the diversification conversation. We enjoy diversity of thoughts, and that dialogue, and from there, some real solutions can come out. So again, it's not we want all like-minded individuals, right? We're not automatons. We're looking for a diversity of ideas, people that come together at the table and share those ideas, and let's come up with, as Chad indicated, some of the best solutions. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time today. As we heard today, operational strength isn't about doing more with less, it's about doing better with purpose. Companies that invest in compliance, smart processes, and adaptable workflows are positioning themselves to weather market uncertainty and regulatory change. The insights shared today remind us that resilience is built over time through continuous improvement and strong partnerships across the industry. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Unlocked. Stay informed, stay adaptable, and we'll see you again in March of 2026. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
All right. Okay. So,
Thank you for watching and/or listening. Please be sure to subscribe to the NAMFS YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to unlocking Season 2 in March 2026.